Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so just some quick announcements to begin with. Um, if you guys want to get a t-shirt, ask Andre, he's in the back. T-shirts are $10. Yeah, and then also check out our amazing friends at Cyber and Wink. Those are their websites. You can get involved looking at their calendars. And we'll also be having an Indeed event tomorrow that basically goes over basic interview tips. That's gonna be super exciting. I'll talk a little more about it at the end, but I'll be passing it on to Yuval now.
Cool. Thanks, Roy. Can you guys hear me in the back? We good? Cool. It's nice. I like seeing all the familiar faces. My name is Yuval Bar. I'm ACM's Professional Development Chair, and you're going to listen to me talk for a little while. However, these are the things we're generally going to be covering. And if you guys have questions at any point, please raise your hand. I'd much rather have a conversation and answer questions rather than just listen to myself talk for an hour. So I would appreciate it. Same thing with the Zoom chat. And Cody, feel free to stop me if you get any questions or anything. So just very generally, we're mostly going to be looking at resume, but a few other things that will basically help you get started with this whole process of applying to internships and making some progress professionally. So first off, let's start with the resume, which is probably the most important part. Before we get into the details, though, I do want to first go over why we even make a resume. And I think this will really help with avoiding some mistakes that we often see when people first start making a resume and people that are less experienced. When you make a resume, a lot of people seem to think that like you're trying to get all of your experience like ever, basically, like kind of like a history of what you've been doing in your entire life. And that's not what a resume is all about. What you want to prioritize when you make a resume is relevant experience to whatever position you are applying to. So one piece of advice that you will often hear from people in the industry or at UCR, some juniors and seniors, is they'll tell you that you should actually change your resume to fit whatever position you're applying to. So for example, in my case, I applied to game development positions as well as software development, and I had different resumes for each, as well as different versions depending on specific positions. And we'll get more into that as we carry on. So again, just to reiterate, you want all the information on your resume to be relevant to the position you are applying for. Some common tools for creating resumes are our favorite at ACM is Overleaf, which is LaTeX. Have you guys heard of LaTeX? No, they're all like freshmen here. I see some yeses, some no's. Okay. LaTeX is kind of like, you can think of it as kind of like a programming language for formatting and structuring your resume. So it's a little different from say like Microsoft Word or like Google Docs, in that it gives you a lot more power over how you structure your resume. So personally, I used a template from Overleaf, but if you prefer to use like Google Doc templates, that's also fine. One main thing is you want to make sure that whatever it is that you use, you can export as a PDF typically, so that whatever formatting you end up doing gets saved and is consistent across, wherever it is that you're submitting it on. That example that you're seeing right over there, that's the actual resume that I applied with to get my internship this last summer. I just changed up some like personal info and whatnot. But other than that, I'm including this because I want you guys to be able to see like what an actual resume might look like. So this isn't like, some stock image of a resume. This is something I actually used. Very important concept, just again, so you guys understand what a resume is. There's no such thing as a perfect resume. My resume could have been rewritten in probably like 1,000 different ways and it still would have been, it still probably would have worked. And same thing for, all of our board members' resumes. There's no such thing as something like perfect. It's more an art than a science, I guess. As long as you keep all your information relevant and you structure it in a way that makes sense to you, then it's good. There's no such thing as like perfect. So again, I'm saying this because I know there are a lot of people who are concerned with like, oh, is my resume good or bad or blah, blah, blah. At some point, as long as you have all the relevant information and it's structured in a good way, it's probably good. So you don't have to like stress over any little line or anything like that, because it's really not that important. The most important thing is how you approach it generally. Okay, so some general guidelines for how you structure your resume is that you should prioritize your sections from top to bottom. So typically the most important sections go on top. And again, when you're doing this, because this resume is supposed to show that you are qualified for whatever position you're applying for, you want to show them the most important information first, which is why we typically follow this kind of structure. Personally, well, both personally and in ACM, we don't really like resumes that have like multiple columns or whatnot, because those are typically confusing. We typically want to have a very straightforward flow of like most important to least important, because we want to make it as easy as possible for whoever's looking at our resume to see how awesome we are, basically, right? I mean, that's basically the whole point, to show that we're qualified and that they want to keep talking to us. So to keep following that theme, get straight to the point, which means this isn't like an essay or anything like that, right? We want to be as straightforward as possible, make it as easy as possible for whoever's reading it to get the necessary information of how awesome you are, basically, right? And how qualified you are. Typically, it's better to have bullet points. You'll see in my example, I actually don't have bullet points other than one of my projects. I made that decision because just the way my resume was structured, I felt like I couldn't fit everything I wanted to fit with bullet points because there's extra spacing. So again, this is something where you could see, like, I could have rewritten my resume with bullet points probably, and it still would have been good, but I made a conscious choice not to do that. And that's something that you guys could do as well. It really depends on how much space you have and what you want to do with it. Are there any questions, by the way, before I keep going? We good? Cool. And then again, my controversial opinion is that your resume should not exceed 1 page. I know some people will tell you that technically it doesn't have to be 1 page. I personally think that especially when you're a student, you don't have so much experience where you really need more than 1 page. I mean, there are people with decades of experience that could still prioritize all of their relevant experience in 1 page. So I think it reflects poorly on you if you end up using more than that space, because it shows that you don't really know how to prioritize your relevant experience. Again, that's my personal opinion. You don't have to follow it, but typically resumes will be 1 page long. So again, before we continue, just so you understand why we structure certain things in a certain way, or why we do certain things later in the individual sections of a resume, let's talk about ATS real quick. So this is an applicant tracking system, which is what most companies use to basically filter through resumes. So most companies you're going to apply to, especially in our field, these are big companies and they're not going through every single resume. Most of them get filtered out and no person ever even gets to look at them. And what we want to do with our resume is make sure that it's not filtered out by the system, and in fact is caught by it to the point where a person actually looks at it and wants to talk to you on the phone, or even like an in-person interview. So don't use headers, for example, because that could be problematic with ATS. It's fine to have things at the top of the page, but when it's actually like in a header, like I don't know if you guys know, but like Word or like Google Docs has like specific separate sections for headers or footers or whatnot. Avoid putting any information and anything like that, because it won't get caught. So for example, like your contact information should not be in a header. And we'll go over in individual sections, but you're going to want to hit certain keywords so that your resume is caught and a recruiter actually takes a look at your resume. Cool, all good? Awesome. Okay. You guys can see that, right? All part of the plan. So let's go over a common way to start your resume. Again, this isn't like something that's like so black and white where you have to follow it exactly as you see it right here. This is just to kind of give you an idea of a way you could structure your resume. This is a common structure for students. Contact info should always go on top no matter what, because that's the most important part, right? It's you, and eventually, I mean, if you're submitting a resume, you'd want someone to contact you. So obviously, that's the most important part. I put an asterisk next to education because right now, typically us like ACM board members, we put education at the top because we're students and internships a lot of times are student only. But regardless, you do want whatever company you're applying to know that you're still in school. Personally, in my internship, people forgot all the time that I'm still in school and they were disappointed every time. So you want to keep reminding whoever it is that you're working with that you are in school, because that changes their expectations, right? Like for example, if they want to hire you, then they need to know when you're graduating. And then relevant experience, skills, and other experience. That kind of depends on how you want to structure your resume, but typically, I think that's a good way to structure it. Any other questions? Cool. Wow. I don't know if I'm doing a good job or you all are just shy, but thank you. Cool. So let's start going. I'm going to start going section by section and kind of giving you an idea of what you can put in each one. Again, this is very personal, so you can feel free to go your own way on each one of these sections, but just to kind of give you an idea of how to get started. So contact info, that should be pretty straightforward. One thing I do want to point out that you don't really have to put an address if you don't want to. I personally do because I apply to companies that aren't just in the California area, which it could be helpful to include at least a location. If you're applying to like East Coast, for example, there are a lot of like time zone changes and whatnot. So it's good for them to be aware of where you're located. Do not include an address if your resume is going to be available publicly. So like some people have the resume available on their website, for example. So there, definitely do not put your actual address. And then another thing that might not be obvious for certain people is to include relevant links. So like if you have a LinkedIn profile, which we'll talk about a little later, or if you have your GitHub, feel free to link that there. And also, please make it an actual link, right? Make it as easy as possible. Again, we're following the same theme of making it as easy as possible for whoever's looking at your resume to find out more about you. So make it a link, make it obvious, like, make it blue or whatnot. And we're good to go for this section. Next up, education. You'd be surprised how many people I've seen at UCR that forget to list UCR on their resume, especially when you're asking for a resume review from a UCR club. So please include UCR on your resume because you are currently a student. And that actually works in your favor because, again, a lot of internships want you to be a student. So first thing you should list is definitely UCR and your major. You can include some relevant coursework. Again, I didn't include any here because of space. I prioritize other things because I needed more space. If you don't have that much space to fill out your resume, it might be good to include some relevant coursework or club involvement and whatnot. Another thing is you don't have to list GPA. I personally wouldn't list GPA if your GPA is lower than like a 3.7. I don't really think listing a GPA really helps you too much. And I don't think it really makes a difference. So especially if it's not really high, there's absolutely no point in listing it because I don't think anyone cares, to be honest. No one ever asked me about school or GPA or anything like that in interviews. But yeah, the rest of the section, I mean, should be pretty straightforward. If you transferred, I would include community colleges. If if you just transferred especially, just so that the recruiters have some kind of idea of what you've been up to over the last few years. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then freshmen, you should definitely include your high school since you just started college. So if you have any, special classes that you took that are relevant to like CS or club involvement or whatnot, then you can list that as well. Cool. Projects. No questions still? We're good? Okay. Projects are probably the most important section. This could also be experience, I guess, if you have relevant experience in the field. But basically, this section is where this is basically going to be like the meat of your resume as a CS major typically. Again, especially if you don't have any professional experience, this is your chance to really show what you're capable of doing. So you can see like in on my resume, I had 4 projects with links. For some of them, it's definitely better to include links if you have any to show what it is that you worked on. You need to make sure that in this section, you really drive home what your experience is and what you're capable of doing. So for example, any programming languages that you use for these projects, you should definitely list first. Any tools or technologies. So in my case, you can see that like for every one of the projects, it starts out with me listing that I use a certain game engine, typically if it's a game dev project, and a programming language. And that's definitely something that you guys would want to start out with because, again, you should make it as easy as possible for whoever's reading your resume to know what your experience is. And also, you'll notice in this particular case that almost all my projects are C++. And again, that's because most game dev listings ask for C++ experience. So this resume is suited to what those job listings require, right? So if you're applying to a position that, I don't know, like let's say they want you to be proficient in Python, then ideally you would have at least 1, maybe more Python projects to show that you really have that kind of experience. Back to what I mentioned during the ATS slide, this is a great place to include some keywords to be caught by ATS. So these keywords, like I gave you a couple of examples here, but realistically, you just need to look at what the job listing is going to have certain adjectives or keywords, and you want to match your resume to whatever those keywords are, right? So for example, if the job listing lists like that you have to, part of the responsibilities are like to collaborate with other programmers, then use the word collaborate on your resume, right? If you use the word coordinate, then use coordinate instead, right? And that's where you can make those little adjustments in order to make your resume better for a specific position, even though you don't really have to like recreate a new resume every time. This is an example of like sections from the links that you saw on the previous page. So I had a couple of projects with links, and this was I had a GitHub repository for each of them and a README. So you could tell that on the left, that was the game dev project, and I'm just showcasing. This was like a platformer game project that I made. I'm just showcasing how I made it easy and accessible for designers, which again is something that was part of the job description that you would have to work with designers. And on the right, this was a C++ project I made, and I provided pseudocode because again, I want to make it as easy as possible for whoever's looking at this to see what I actually did without having to like sift through code if they don't want to, right? And the example on the left, I actually had one of the interviewers mention that they loved seeing that. So they definitely do look, not always, but it is possible. So I definitely recommend, again, making it as easy as possible for whoever's reading your resume to see how cool you are, basically. Ooh. assassination attempt. I still got a question. Someone asked, is that where we put the certifications maybe? Was that during the education section or? You could put certifications. Well, it depends. I mean, if the certification comes from like something related to the school, then yes. Otherwise, there is going to be an like other experience section, which you can use to put on certifications or achievements or whatnot, which would typically go in that at the end, but it really depends on how relevant that experience is. So, okay, I'm hoping that answered your question. Again, it depends on how relevant the certification is. If it is and you want to include it, you can include it before. You can have, it could be its own section as well. It really depends on you individually. Are there any other questions, by the way? Yeah, go ahead.
What is your opinion about putting research on the resume, especially research that is not with the computer science perspective, or rather other skills?
Cool. If people on Zoom can hear that, asking what about research, especially research that you said isn't necessarily related to CS, right? I think that's still great. Maybe I wouldn't prioritize it as much as something that's more relevant to CS if you're applying to CS position. But that's still, I mean, that still shows that you're, able to learn and work independently. So I still think that's great. You can still include that in your project section or experience, but I would probably put it below more relevant experience. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Roy, do you want to take this because I hear like I want to have like feedback into the mic. Cool. Now this skill section, it's kind of funny because really you already list a lot of skills in your projects and experience section. But this is just a place where, recruiters or whoever is looking at your resume could just quickly look and see all of the skills in one place, right? But ideally, all of these skills that are listed down here are already reflected in your projects or experience section, right? Like you can see I listed that I know like Java and I'm familiar with Python, but really it's not that important because I don't have any Java or Python projects listed up there. And the reason why I still listed them is because the position I applied to didn't really require knowledge in Java or Python. So just something that I listed since I'm already taking up that line with programming languages. But keep in mind that whatever you do list, like if you list a programming language, the best thing you can do is already have it listed under one of your projects or experiences, because that proves that you've actually used it before and you produce something with it. Software and tools, you can include, at some point you guys are going to take like CS100, which will allow you to use Git. You can include Git in that if you'd like. Any kind of like, special API that you've learned. In my case, I listed game engines that I've used before. And you can see I also have one line for other interests. This isn't something that you have to include. I personally include it just so I don't come off as so one-dimensional, as someone who, doesn't just sit in my room and code all day. It's fine to still show that you have a little bit of personality and other interests. And that could be like a conversation starter. Like I know people who have, if they have like some kind of rare book collection, then they list that on their resume as well. It could be like a great icebreaker for whoever's interviewing you. Oh yeah, please don't include things like problem solving, time management. Where are some good ones? Leadership skills. Those aren't skills. Those skills are important, but they're not something that you list on your resume. So those should be implied by the rest of your resume, right? So time management should be implied by, like, for example, let me move on and you'll be able to see. I have completely irrelevant work experience on my resume. And the reason is First of all, because it fills in some kind of chronological gap so that whoever is interviewing me knows what I've been up to over the last few years, which typically they would want to know. They don't like seeing gaps in time. But also, time management is implied because I was working while being a full-time student. So I don't actually have to list time management. Same thing if like there's a position who requires some kind of, leadership skills. Don't just have skills and then list like leadership, right? You can just say something like under one of your experiences, like led a group of blah, blah, blah. And it'll be implied that way. But this is a good section to include. You can include achievements, which aren't necessarily as relevant if it's something you're proud of and you still think it shows some kind of quality or those transferable skills. But again, like anything with your resume, whatever you're including, you should include it for a reason, right? You should never include something just because you already did it. You should put it on your resume because there's a certain purpose to it being on your resume, and it's helping you stand out in some way, right? Or again, if omitting it would result in some kind of chronological gap. If it's like volunteering or community service work, that's also great, right? That also shows different qualities in you as a person, so that's great as well. But typically, I don't think this section should take up too much space, and I don't think it typically needs to. You can get a lot of information in a little bit of space. We're basically done with this resume question. Are there any questions before I move on to another section? No? Is chat good? Awesome. Oh, what's up?
Yeah, it's like what you do, like you don't have either like you don't have a lot of experience or like
Are you a freshman? Yeah. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. It is, we mentioned in the last GM as well, it is a little bit harder as a freshman, unless you're applying for freshman only or freshman sophomore only internships. It is a little bit harder because again, like you said, it's hard to fill up a resume when you don't have experience. And I completely understand that. I personally had like no relevant experience at all when I was a freshman. So you don't have to worry about, like, you're not behind basically if you don't have any experience, right? But what I would say is at least start this process, even if you don't have too much stuff to put on your resume, just so that you're familiar with it. And again, now you're a freshman, you don't really have any kind of stress about, finding a job or internship. You have so much time. So I'd say start now just so that you kind of get a feel for what's out there. Like when I was a freshman, I was just looking at job listings for full-time positions just to see what they're looking for. And then I worked from there and said, okay, how can I build up that kind of experience to get to that point eventually, right? So at this point, right now, I guess you guys just started. You can still put on like projects from your classes if they are relevant. A lot of it's preferable not to have school projects because it shows that you're very passionate about it and you do it in your own time. But a lot of our projects, especially at UCR, kind of force you to build something from scratch. So you're going to design and implement things from scratch. And that's something that's perfectly fine to put on your resume. So again, now you just started. So if you don't have anything, it's perfectly fine. But as you make projects, even for your classes, think about, hey, is this something I could put on my resume? And eventually you'll have so many that you'll have to prioritize which ones you actually want to include and not. But I hope that answers your question. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. So cover letters, we're not going to cover too much because they're really not too important. They're typically optional. I did want to go over them really quickly though, because there could be the possibility that they are required for whatever you're applying for, or just to say that I think even though they are optional, it doesn't hurt to submit a cover letter because it could help you stand out if that company happens to actually read the cover letters, which I won't lie to you. I think most of the time no one looks at it. But you can create one cover letter if it's similar types of positions. You can create one cover letter and have it kind of like a template, and then you can edit it based on what you're applying to, and it doesn't even take that long. So I think it's worth it. But generally, this is kind of like a good structure to follow. And in this particular case, I don't think that's clear enough for you guys to read, but I didn't really intend for people to read it. But in this case, I do mention this is a game dev studio that I applied to and I actually got an interview from. And in my cover letter, I mentioned like playing their games from like 20 years ago and having that connection. So this is a opportunity to list some things that you don't really have an opportunity to mention on your resume, especially because you don't have that much space. And like that's not something that's really relevant as far as me being qualified, but it's something nice for them to know, right? So also, it doesn't have to be that long. This is actually way longer than it needs to be, but it just kind of gives you an idea of a possible structure that you can have for a cover letter. But again, typically they're optional and it's not too big a deal. My advice is to still write one up and just have it handy. Cool, let's move on to LinkedIn. I'm assuming most of you heard about LinkedIn by now, but in case you didn't, LinkedIn is, it's kind of like social media with more like career focus. So some people nowadays, especially I've noticed, have been treating it a lot more like social media, which I wouldn't do. I would keep it more professional, but I've seen people start posting memes and stuff as well. So it really is becoming that. But basically, this is something that recruiters typically check. So it typically comes up on a Google search, and it does also give you an opportunity to mention a little bit more than what's on your resume. Like the summary section, the summary that you see on the right, I purposely chose because it's a senior software engineer, so you can see what that might look like for someone who's an engineer. But you can also notice that this is a little similar to like a cover letter structure. So I guess in a way, your LinkedIn profile could kind of be a combination of like a cover letter and a resume. But again, it's something that's just good to have, just in case, because as we'll see in a couple of slides, you could use it to stay connected to different people. When you actually create your profile, again, we don't have to go too much into this because LinkedIn is very good at helping you set up your profile and telling you how good your profile is. In my case, my profile, LinkedIn still thinks my profile is of intermediate strength, so I still have a lot of work to do myself. But again, that just goes to show you don't have to have like a perfect LinkedIn profile or anything like that. It's just good to have something professional in case you get some kind of opportunity where you can take advantage of LinkedIn. Another thing I will mention and recommend is custom URL. You'll see a lot of us at ACM have custom URLs for LinkedIn, which is a cool feature. So I think for me, it's like the LinkedIn URL plus like Yuval game dev, I believe, and that's just something again that's easier to. It's even easier to copy and paste and make sure that you don't have any mistakes in it, and it's more memorable. If you want to also look at other people's LinkedIn profiles, the ACM Discord has a LinkedIn channel. You can post yours and also connect to other students and the ACM board, and we can all stay connected and feel good about ourselves. But yeah, in general, what you want to do is connect with as many people as you can on LinkedIn. I personally stopped adding people that I don't know in person. I know some people still add others just if like the experience is relevant. I personally don't like that. You're free to do as you wish, but I think the main takeaway would be to create a LinkedIn and stay connected with fellow students that you come across. If you have like an internship experience at some point, I wouldn't add your coworkers right away, but especially towards the end, stay connected with your coworkers, maybe your lead or whatnot. It definitely goes a long way, and also, as you'll see later, will help you in finding opportunities that are more relevant to your experience. LinkedIn gives you the ability to like endorse different skills with people that you worked with, and they can also endorse your skills, which is pretty cool. I don't know how much it really matters, to be honest with you. But it makes you feel good when your coworkers tell you how they think that you did a good job and they endorse your like C++ skill or whatnot. But regardless of that, your LinkedIn profile, the more involved it is, it'll make it easier for you to find a job using LinkedIn, and we'll talk more about that later. Are there any questions about LinkedIn before I move on? Cool. So after all of that, let's talk about what we're actually here for, which is applying to internships. So there are so many different ways to find internship listings, and there's no like correct way to do it. These are some suggestions of things that we use at ACM to find internships and I guess jobs in general. But like me personally, for example, I knew when I was looking for internships, I knew I really wanted to work for Epic. So I checked their site all the time manually. And typically I would apply to listings before they appeared on one of the sites that like aggregated. So like LinkedIn Jobs, Handshake, or like Google Careers typically will get updated a little bit after. But if there's a position that you really want, there's no shame in just, you know, checking the actual company site every once in a while and, you know, just refresh the page until you see that listing that you're expecting. Now is a good time. Most internships will be open now until, what would you say, Roy?
I don't know, December, January?
Yeah. So let's say like, I'd say you have until now, until probably about like December, January. Technically, I think most companies say that it doesn't matter when you apply, but realistically it does. Like the sooner the better, because sometimes they might find candidates, interview them, and already give away the position before you apply, even though technically it's still open. So I would advise getting on this process as soon as you can. But I do understand that it's hard with like school and everything. So like don't kill yourself over it, but definitely try at least, especially if you're a freshman, at least try to take a look at what's out there and organizing your resume and everything. And even if you don't apply, at least you have a little bit more insight going into it the next time you look into this process. But really quickly, this is what LinkedIn Jobs looks like. So this is actually like some suggestions I got when I looked at LinkedIn Jobs. I interned as a gameplay programmer over summer. So you'll see that LinkedIn Jobs actually gave me opportunities that are very similar to what my experience is, or at least what I mentioned on my profile. And then you can have alerts for certain jobs that you might be interested in. So I'm pretty sure this will send you an email as well to whatever email you have connected to your LinkedIn. And that's a really good way of staying on top of applying to internships and keeping track of positions that you're really interested in. Another option that UCR endorses, so this is what the Career Center advises everyone to use, and I've used it myself, is Handshake. Have you guys heard of Handshake at all? Cool. Okay, nice. You've all been indoctrinated. Handshake is cool. It also has a similar kind of like job alert feature where you follow certain companies and then you'll get notifications. Like you'll see, I still follow Epic, and that's how that's like the kind of emails I still get, which honestly I leave on just because I'm curious to see what kind of positions they keep adding. But Handshake is, again, it's very similar. It's going to ask you to kind of like build your profile. You have an option to upload your resume onto your profile, and you'll have options to apply directly through Handshake, which people at the Career Center said that there is like some kind of deal with Handshake where if you apply through Handshake, you might get priority as a student. I don't know if that's really true, but it's worth a shot. And you can also use Handshake for different different events like virtual career fairs and all other kinds of talks that relate to like professional development. So I recommend at least making a profile if you haven't yet. There's a link right there, just ucr.joinhandshake.com. If you don't have your profile set up yet, I think it's very useful. Any questions about any of that before we move on? Nice. So then when you actually apply, I recommend keeping track of all the places that you're applying to. It'll be more fulfilling and you'll really feel like you're making progress, even if you don't hear back, because you know it's normal to not hear back from anywhere for a long time sometimes, and it could be very discouraging if you've just been applying and you haven't been keeping track of anything, because it will feel like you haven't been doing anything. So that's what my actual like Google Sheets document looked like when I was applying to internships a year ago. And you'll see I have this counter at the top of the number of positions I applied to, which was important for me because it made me feel good, like I was actually making progress even if I wasn't hearing back from anywhere when I saw that number keep growing. So I recommend it. That also allowed me to keep track of where I heard back from and where I didn't, and where I could still expect to hear back from. Because like you can see, I didn't hear back from most of those places. So like technically, whenever you look at it, you can kind of tell if you should still expect to hear back from certain places or not, even though obviously a lot of companies just don't really respond in general, which again is normal for some companies to ghost you. But I also marked out the ones that actually sent me like a rejection letter, which in a way is also good because then you can kind of keep track of what options you still have, and maybe even you can look at the ones that you got rejection letters from and compare those to the ones where you got interviews from and see what was different in those positions and the resume that you used to apply with, and use those opportunities to learn about the process, because again there's always more to learn. This isn't any like this isn't something that's like exact and you're going to like perfect and get interviews from every single position. It's more about learning and giving yourself the best chance to hear back from these places. Questions?
What software did you use to keep track of it?
Oh, this was a Google Sheets. It's kind of like Excel.
Oh, that.
So what I did was, have you guys used Excel or Sheets or anything similar? Yeah, I see a lot of you did. Okay, cool. So basically, I organized this by, again, it's not like super legible or anything, but you can see in the middle I have the dates that I applied and the listings. The dates, in case you guys didn't know, in Excel and Sheets you can format it to actually be a date. So I use that, and then for that counter in the top, if you do like, I believe it's equals and then parentheses, you can start writing kind of like a mathematical formula. And if you need help with that, you can feel free to reach out to me on Discord, and I can help you out with that. But basically, you can have like a formula, and that will basically look at whether or not you have entries in these certain columns, and it will add it to that number. Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd probably have to clean it up a little bit, but yeah, definitely. What's up?
I want to apply for internship and I want to get the number of like
What would be the number of positions to apply for? I'm sorry, I forgot that Zoom might not hear the questions. Someone asked if I can share the template. I said yes, and then the previous question was what kind of software I used. So I just said it was Google Sheets or Excel. And then now the current question was what's the number that you should aim for, basically? Yeah, there's no right answer to that. There are people who, as you heard in the intern panel, if you attended that, there are people who applied to over 100 positions, and there are people who applied to, well, like in my case, I applied to 42, and that's all it took. And that doesn't mean that, it doesn't even necessarily mean that I had better luck than someone who applied to 100. There are people who just apply way more than I did, for example. There are people who would apply to, you know, some people can apply to like a dozen positions in a day. I personally couldn't do that. So I'd say as many as you can without hurting your mental health. How about that? Because at the end of the day, you know, this shouldn't, it is a bit of a tedious process, but you shouldn't be suffering to try and get an internship, right? It's still, I mean, it's still dealing with you, right? At the end of the day, all the resume and everything, it's like you're kind of dealing with documents that have to do with you and how awesome you are in a way. So, you know, you should narcissistically kind of enjoy it in certain ways. But no, you shouldn't worry about the number so much. Again, the number for me wasn't because I had some goal number. It was just to make sure that I'm still making progress. So like, you know, that number is 42. Well, last week it was 38. So I know I still did a little bit more this week, and I improved my chances of getting something. But some people I know look at it more like statistically. You know, it's like if you only have like a 5% chance at like each internship position, then the more you apply to, the chance of you not hearing back keeps decreasing with every position that you apply to. So I guess you could look at it that way, but realistically, I think you should just try to enjoy this process as much as you can, and you know, apply as much as you can without straining yourself. Yeah, what's up?
It's a tedious process, but what about it?
You're doing the same thing over and over again. Sorry, for our Zoom viewers, yes, what makes the process so tedious? You're doing a lot of the same things over and over again. It's not really apparent from, you know, just the slides. I'm just trying to go over the important information. When you apply to all these positions, typically every site, I mean, every company, a lot of times they want you to make your own account. So it's like, for example, there's Workday, which would want you to have your own account for a specific company. And then you upload your resume, you have to write out all of your details, which are exactly the same as they appear on your resume, but they still make you, you know, write it out. And then you have to do that for every position you apply to typically. So that kind of like repetitiveness kind of gets old eventually. But again, that's a great question. And that also reinforces my point that I think even if you're a freshman, you should at least try to apply places, even, you know, have lower expectations, especially if you're not applying to freshman specific internships. But it's great because then you'll get to see what the process is like, and you'll have a better understanding of it when you get to the point where you have more experience and you have a better shot at hearing back from all of these places. Does that answer your question? Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. So I kind of already mentioned this since someone asked, but any of us that got an internship or a job or anything, we definitely also got lucky. The takeaway is, in my opinion, you want to work as hard as you can to give yourself the opportunity to get lucky. Okay, so this doesn't diminish like all the work that you do or anything like that. I worked incredibly hard to get my internship, but I also acknowledge that I got really lucky because that's just what it is. It's a numbers game, you know. And just because you don't hear back from like one place doesn't mean that you won't hear back from another. And just because you don't hear back from, you know, some FANG Fortune 500 company doesn't mean that you won't hear back from another, and doesn't mean that that's necessarily a good fit for you. There are a lot of things to consider when it comes to this process, and I know it's hard, but try not to have, you know, any expectations or like basically just try to go with the flow. Because don't get disappointed if the place that you really wanted didn't end up contacting you, because sometimes it's for the better. My first interview didn't go well, and it was a game dev studio, and it was the first time I ever heard back from a game dev studio, and I was so disappointed that the interview didn't go well, and it actually ended up being for the better because I heard back from a better company right after. So you really never know what's going to happen. But again, you're just doing your best, and then you're forgetting about it, is how I look at it, right? Apply, but then don't keep being concerned with your progress or hearing back unless you're in that mode. So I would say, like, if in that day you're like, okay, now I'm going to start applying, or doing coding challenges if you did hear back or whatnot, then say, okay, right now I'm going to do that. But when you're done, go back to school, go back to hang out with your friends, go back to your normal life, right? Don't be obsessed with it, and don't think about it all the time. Roy. Thank you guys for listening to me ramble on until now. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand or ask in chat right now. But otherwise, you can always contact me or any of the other ACM board members on Discord or email. Our information should be available online. And just know you're all doing great.
Okay, thank you, Yuval. Before we let you guys go, we have just a final few last announcements. So first of all, how many people are here in the camp of, oh, I don't really have much experience on my resume, like I'm the first year, or I don't really know what to do? Raise your hands. All right, so pretty much 60, 70%. I know we've already mentioned this. This is a great way to kind of get more experience or a project on your resume. QT Hack is happening in, I think, just over 15 days. It's on November 6th. If you haven't applied yet, please be sure to go to qthack.io. If you guys have any questions, we actually have one of the directors of QT Hack right here in the teal t-shirt, second row on my right side. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, be sure to talk to her. And just one final thing, does anyone here have any clue of what to expect during a technical interview, know how to prepare, et cetera, Raise your hand if you don't. Okay, almost everyone as well, and that's fine as well. Tomorrow we're gonna be having an event with Indeed. It's gonna be a recruiter as well as an engineer, a software engineer specifically, and they'll kind of be doing just a demo or a mock interview between the recruiter and the engineer. So if you're free from 12 to 1 p.m., be sure to join that. You can kind of see how the entire flow goes, behavioral, technical, all of that, and understand what you need to prepare for and what you should be doing during your interview. That's all for me. We've got pizza in the back. Yeah, thank you guys for being here.